Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. I'm of course your host, TJ. Now today we're talking about a book called The Six Loves of James I, which is written by Gareth Russell. I actually got this book as an ARC, so, it isn't out yet, but I really want to raise awareness for it because I think it's a really important book that we should be reading. Now, if you know anything about James I, of course, you probably know that he is the one who oversaw the translation of the King James Bible, named after him, obviously. But if you know anything about him, or if you watch the show Mary and George on Starz, you'll also know that he was quite enamored of the young men in his circle, both in Scotland but also in England. And I think that, the book is pretty transparent about the fact that those relationships, for the most part, were deeply erotic, deeply romantic, deeply meaningful to King James. And while, of course, I don't think Gareth Russell ever sort of, he doesn't buy into, contemporary identities that map onto the past explicitly, but he does show the extent to which, James was someone, maybe we wouldn't call him gay in the way that we think of that word, but he was definitely homosexual in the sense that it's pretty clear and almost unequivocal that he had sexual relations with men. And I appreciate that the novel really kind of gives us insight into the private life of this very strange monarch. If you know anything about James, you know that he started as King of Scotland after the abdication of his mother, Mary, Queen of Scots. Then, after the death of Elizabeth I, he succeeded and became King of England, and, basically every king and queen of England subsequently can trace their ancestry back to James. So he has a really key role in English history. And I really appreciate that we get sort of a peek behind the curtain at the various men and at least one woman who were, in some sense, for his love. Now, I'm going to focus, for the purposes of this very short review, on the two people that I think were really important to him. One was his wife, Anna, from Denmark. The other, of course, was George Villiers, later Duke of Buckingham, who was, I think Russell would agree, the love of James's life. And, I think that those were two very important relationships, and I think that Russell does a very good job of teasing out those bonds. Obviously, James and Anna sort of drifted apart in later years. She had basically her own court and did her own thing. But, it is worth noting that he did go across the sea to pick her up and, bring her to Scotland after she was stranded by a storm. So, they had an arrangement. They had an understanding, which I think is really, very modern in a way. But it was really George Villiers that was, I think, the sort of beating heart of King James's life. James had all sorts of nicknames for him. Got him Steenie, which is a derivative of Stephen in reference to a biblical figure. James called himself Buckingham's dear old dad. It was clear that they were physically intimate. Now, how far that went is an open question. Whether, they actually had anal sex is unclear, but it is clear that they had a deeply physical and, I dare say, sexual relationship. And it's certainly one that Buckingham was, I think, there was a tendency for a long time to see Buckingham as this sort of opportunist who was just sort of taking advantage of James. But I think that what Russell allows us to see is that this was very much a relationship that was mutually beneficial and that both parties felt very much invested in. And, I think we tend to see monarchs as these larger-than-life figures that sort of live behind all the panoply and the inscrutability of monarchy. But, that's the value of a book like this, is to sort of shine the light behind the curtain. And Gareth Russell does really a very good job of, drawing on primary sources to sort of paint a portrait of James the person and also what his court would look like. And as the title implies, there are many other lovers that sort of dance across the stage, including Somerset, who was one of his other favorites. But, they were often short-lived, and, James was well known for being, willing to flit from affair to affair. But it was really the Duke of Buckingham who kind of occupied his mind, his soul, his heart, right up until James's death. And Buckingham ultimately outlives James and becomes a very key figure in the reign of James's son, King Charles, before he's assassinated by a disgruntled soldier. I think there's something almost melancholy about this novel. I think that it really paints James in a nuanced and complex light. He wasn't I don't know if he was a great king necessarily, but he was a deeply, emotional one who cared deeply about the men in his life, not so much the women. He was kind of a rampant misogynist, really. But I do appreciate that we sort of get this portrait of the human behind the monarch. That even though James was someone who believed steadfastly in absolute monarchy, it was really these personal relationships that undergirded him, that supported him throughout his life. And I think there's even something a little touching about this relationship between James and George Villiers that lasts until the former's death. You know, I mean, I can think of many contemporary gay relationships that don't last nearly as long. And so I really appreciate the sort of balanced take that Russell takes to the material. Like, he doesn't impose our current understandings of what sexuality looks like, but nor does he shy away. He's not, squeamish about depicting the real behind the scenes look at what the private life of a king could look like. So I definitely think this is a book you should read. It's coming out later this year. It's December the 2nd, so I definitely recommend it. If you can get it, I think it might still be on NetGalley, but if not, definitely pick it up. I think queer history is just so important, that we look at these figures from the past who had complicated lives, whose identities were very complex and very nuanced, and I appreciate that we have books like this that shed light on that and illustrate the extent to which these stories are still relevant, and how queer people have always existed at all social and political ranks, up to and including Kings of England. So it does definitely get the Pisces Guide seal of approval, or Pisces Guide to Pop Culture seal of approval. So that's all I have for today. Again, that is The Six Loves of James I by Gareth Russell. Do check it out. It's a fantastic book when it releases later this year. So anyway, thanks so much as always for joining me here at the Pisces Guide. I definitely appreciate all of you. I hope you have a great afternoon. Take care, y'all.